All right, well, we're moving on now to a much awaited session at our NXT Summit 2025. Yes, for an extremely special keynote address, we're very proud to have with us a futurist. Yes, someone who, of course, has a lot of admirers across the world, but right here in India too. I am talking about Alec Ross. He's with us here in New Delhi for the NXT Summit, and he's gracing the stage now next. Let's hear it for him. Alec Ross, could we please have you on stage?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So one of the things that I particularly appreciate about this conference is the diversity of the people speaking. We've literally gone from a Hungarian minister to an American cowboy. So I'll be bringing the perspective. We've talked a little bit about America and America's place in innovation. While I'm an academic and I write books, I come from the sort of cowboy world of entrepreneurship and venture capital. Started a company in a basement with 3 buddies without 2 cents to our name and grew it into a global company. And now I'm focused on supporting other young entrepreneurs around the world, including here in India. And what I want to do is I want to give a perspective about some of what I think is about to happen. Not looking out science fiction, looking out 20, 25 years. But let's talk about not what people are so focused on necessarily in 2025, but let's look at 2026. And underarching all of this, when we talk about the raw material of the economy, I can't help but think that land was the raw material of the agricultural age, iron was the raw material of the industrial age, and data is the raw material of today and tomorrow's world. He who owned the land and controlled the land during the agricultural age had the economic power and had the political power. During the industrial age, he who owned the factories and controlled access to the natural resources had the economic power and had the political power. In today's world, he or she who own the data, control the data, or can harvest meaning from the data are those that are creating the industries and businesses of the future. And we're doing this in a world that is digitizing in such a way, I don't care whether we're talking about housing, as we were talking about 2 sessions ago, or culture, or anything else. I no longer believe there actually is a digital sector anymore, but rather I believe that all sectors are in fact digital. And all sectors are in fact being transformed by technological forces, the most recent of which is artificial intelligence. And I am going to dedicate some time to discussing artificial intelligence and breaking down some of what is happening, at least from my perspective as an American and having just spent several months in the United States at the headquarters of a lot of these big companies. I want to give a couple pieces of data to sort of frame this data-rooted economy. Just 10 years ago, so 2015, not a long time ago, 10 years ago there were 15 billion networked devices in the world. These are our smartphones, there are laptops, but more significantly, and certainly more significantly for India, they're the sensors in our supply chains and in our factories. Today, just 10 years later, that number has gone from 15 billion to 75 billion. 15 billion to 75 billion. And just in the last year, the end of February last year to this period, we've gone from 62 billion to 75 billion. And that is not because we're putting more cell phones in more pockets. It's because we're digitizing industries that historically were non-digital, from transportation to agriculture to manufacturing. And within all of this, if we think about the last 10 years, and I were to frame sort of what the global models have been, if I were to do this very undiplomatically, I worked for President Obama for 4 years as a diplomat. I'm not a diplomat anymore, so I don't need to be diplomatic. I'd say America innovates, China replicates, Europe regulates. And that's sort of a very sweeping statement to make, but it's mostly true. It's mostly true. And so my question, even with Deep 6, the most recent Chinese model, an LLM was an American innovation. Deep 6 was trained using American chips that it largely bought on the black market through Singapore and trained on OpenAI's model. So the great Chinese innovation in this respect was that it figured out how to less expensively and more efficiently do a sort of B-minus job of an American LLM. Now, I'm not going to spend the next 15 minutes insulting China. I'm going to point out some areas where I think that they are moving from replication to innovation. But I think the more interesting question for those of us who are here is, okay, so what United States, so what China, so what Europe? What about the other rising powers? What about India? What about the Gulf states? Where do they fall within this frame? And what I would say is, I'll repeat something that was said from the stage earlier. It's that the future is not something that's guaranteed. It's something that's made up by a series of choices. None of this is predetermined. None of us are truly omniscient about what is going to happen economically, geopolitically, or geoeconomically. What I will say is that India is in a good position, but it's not in a position that will guarantee success over the next 5 years in terms of being able to truly innovate. And what I want to do is unpack that a little bit. You know, I've invested, over the last handful of years, I've invested $900 million into 45 startups on 5 continents, including in India. I've done that with my partner in the United States, my venture capital partner, who is Indian American, Shield Tile. And what's interesting is we think about India, and as we invest in India and elsewhere, the big thing that's coming right now with artificial intelligence is that India, if it doesn't significantly invest in and lead in artificial intelligence, it's going to lose one of the 2 great advantages it's had over the last 10 years. One great advantage has been its large market. It's not going to lose its large unified market. But one of the ways in which India has been so successful is that the base unit cost of labor for a highly skilled, highly educated technical talent has been substantially lower than it's been in the United States or in Europe. So I flew to Delhi yesterday from Zurich because I sit on the board of directors of a Swiss company. And we employ a huge number of engineers in India. Why? Because they're smart, they're hardworking, and the basic cost of labor is lower in India than it would be in Switzerland or in the United States. But the interesting thing that's happening right now with AI, we've been talking about increased productivity by virtue of digitization for 20, 25 years, and it hasn't happened. What digitization has enabled us to do is actually work longer and work harder, and just a little bit more productively. This is what the economic data shows us. But what's interesting is if you're sort of a nerd like me and you really get into the data, what we're seeing is that over the last 18 months, AI is delivering the promise in terms of increased productivity that people have expected for the last 20 to 25 years in digitization. And what that means is that much more important than having than the base unit cost of labor is the base unit of knowledge and creativity. This is what's actually very counterintuitive. Knowledge, yes. So if what we're seeing is a great engineer empowered by AI is suddenly massively more productive, you're willing to pay more for an engineer who knows how to use those tools effectively. And then part of what we're seeing is that the top 2% of engineers using AI, one of the most interesting characteristics about them is that they combine their technical knowledge with creativity. This is one of the counterintuitive things about this next stage of digitization. It's that as our behaviors, as our business processes grow increasingly algorithmic, as humans become more like machines, as machines become more like humans, that which makes us human actually grows more important. So if you're able to combine technical knowledge with creativity, with an understanding of behavioral psychology, with emotional intelligence, and other such things, those are the people we find are creating the most economic value in society. And so the opportunity then for India and for other states, for example, in the Gulf, is to figure out how to accelerate the domain expertise within artificial intelligence, but do so in an interdisciplinary way where we also have an understanding of skills that we tend to associate with the humanities. As the world grows increasingly driven by algorithms, that which makes us most human grows more important. Now, I do want to get specific for a couple minutes on some specific aspects of AI, because people say AI, and that means sort of everything and nothing. When people say AI, it means sort of everything and nothing. And what I want to do is I want to deconstruct this a little bit. A couple people, I only got here this morning, but a couple people have already asked me, can India be a big independent AI market where it can compete on foundational models against the Chinese, against the Americans? And what I would say is, in order for that to be the case, and it could be the case, it absolutely could be the case, you need to have all four pieces of the AI stack. And those four pieces are, number one, energy. These technologies require an enormous amount of energy. Number two, compute. So the reason why Europe's most valuable tech company is a Dutch company called ASML is because it builds the machines that enable compute. One of the 2 or 3 biggest companies by market cap, depending on the day, is NVIDIA. I bet just about nobody in this room would have heard of NVIDIA 10 years ago. Why is NVIDIA now a multi-trillion-dollar company? It's because of that second stack, compute. So India needs to have energy, it needs to have compute, and the third is data. So once, as I said, land was the raw material of the agricultural age, iron was the raw material of the industrial age, data is the raw material of today and tomorrow's world. So you have energy, which drives compute, which then has to create structured data, on top of which is the fourth and last part, the models. You have to be able to build models on top of the energy, the compute which produce the data. So the models are things like ChatGPT, Anthropic's Claude. It's the actual application. It's the actual application that is where the real magic happens. So those are the 4 layers of the stack that I think you have to understand. And 95% of the time, when people tell me if any one country can do that, my answer is no. Because there's some piece of the stack that's missing. France right now has the aspiration of doing it in Europe because they say they have nuclear power. So unlike other European states, they have the energy. They're making big investments in compute, which will produce the data, and they have a single offering in models with Mistral. But that's sort of everything has to work perfectly, and I'm somewhat skeptical about that. In the Gulf, the Emiratis and the Saudis are putting an almost infinite amount of money into this. They have the energy, their money can produce the compute and the data. But I think it's a very open question whether they have the human capital to produce the models. In Saudi and in the Emirates, they do not have the talent that exists in India. And the only way they will have the talent to be able to build the models is to convince that great Indian talent that previously went to the UK or went to the USA. I mean, think about the USA. Who's the CEO of Microsoft? Indian ancestry. CEO of Google, Indian ancestry. CEO of IBM, Indian ancestry. CEO of Adobe, Indian ancestry. CEO of Palo Alto Networks, Indian ancestry. CEO of Micron, Indian ancestry. CEO of FedEx, one after another. The talent went to the United States or the talent went to the UK. The only way they can do this in the Gulf, even if they have all the money in the world, is to convince your great talents to neither go to the UK, don't go to the USA, and don't stay home, come to the Emirates. So what this means is if you look at these four levels of the stack, I actually am more optimistic about India being able to join the United States and China as a true global protagonist player than I am France or than I am in the Gulf. And frankly, other than those, I don't think there are any realistic choices in the world for being able to do this independently. I also think it's important to understand the four different true versions of AI. People say AI like it's not one thing. It's not one thing. The four, I'm going to oversimplify this. Four kinds of AI. Number one, perceptual AI. Number two, generative AI. Number three, agentic AI. And number four, physical AI. And let me explain each of those briefly. Perceptual AI is the AI that most of us know from 2017 to 2021. When I pick up my iPhone, I don't have to type in a cell phone, it recognizes my face. That is perceptual AI. When you're in your Maybach or you're in your Tesla, the ingestion of data that creates the visual models, that is perceptual AI. It's AI that is ingesting information and analyzing what is going on around it, okay? That's perceptual AI. And in perceptual AI, the US and the Chinese are about even, okay? The US had a big advantage. Right now, they're about even. Number two is generative AI. Most people, when they say AI now, they're talking about generative AI. This is artificial intelligence that produces new content. So data comes in, and then the AI is able to do an analysis. So if I'm able to say to one of these LLMs, please give me an analysis of former Prime Minister Tony Abbott's views on trade, on foreign policy, and past and present relationships within India. What that LLM is able to do is it is able to produce original content based on querying sources at my direction. That is generative AI. That's what everybody's focusing on. At this conference next year, that's not what people are going to be talking about. They're going to be talking about agentic AI. And if you go to the cool kids tables in Silicon Valley or in Shenzhen, they're talking a little bit about generative AI. They're talking a lot more about agentic AI. What is agentic AI? Agentic AI is AI with autonomy. So when I ask my LLM, when I ask my generative AI for an analysis of Tony Abbott's views, it is going out and it's culling information, it's giving me what I asked for. Agentic AI is task-oriented. So what that would mean is I can't do it now, but I'll be able to in about a year. I'll be able to tell my AI, instead of flying back to the United States tomorrow, I want to fly to Sydney. I want to fly with no more than one stop. I want you to book me a business class ticket. I want you to find a 4 or 5 star hotel at under $500 per night. And I want you to query my Facebook friends who live in and around Sydney, let them know that I'm in town and find out who's available for a drink after I get there. Hit that button and it happens. That's agentic AI. Now, agentic AI, that's a consumer model of agentic AI. A B2B agentic model of agentic AI, I think is going to come sooner and I think represents a lot of opportunities. This is in a case where the agent of one company talks to, usually, the agents of another company. So let's say you make bottle caps. I sit on the board of directors of a company that makes bottle caps. The agent, the AI of my company, can speak to the agent, the AI of another company, and say, hey, we need 30 metric tons of this kind of aluminum at this processing grade. We need it on these dates across these delivery dates. Can you give me pricing and availability? And the other agent responds with the information. So that's what's coming. The fourth stage, and in agentic AI, so perceptual AI, the US and Chinese are about even. Generative AI, the United States is way ahead, in part because it's very difficult to censor large language models, and the Chinese will not accept totally open models. In agentic AI, the US is a little bit ahead, I would say, on the consumer models, and the Chinese in the US are about even on the business-to-business models. The area where the Chinese are ahead is in category number 4, which is physical AI. Physical AI is the combination of artificial intelligence with the physical world. These are our drones. These are our self-driving cars. These are the robots and the robotics that are in most of our factories. If you go into truly advanced factories right now, one of the things that will strike you is how few human beings there are and how automated and how AI-driven they are. I want to take all of this sort of conceptual stuff. I'm running out of time, but I want to give one very concrete example of what this means in almost banal terms. I'm going to go back to my bottle cap company, all right? I sit on the board of directors of this company, and it's headquartered in Italy. I spend 40% of the year in Italy. And you can't, I mean, what could be more old-fashioned than aluminum bottle caps? But what's interesting is we produce 40 billion a year. So if you're drinking a Kingfisher in Delhi or a Heineken in the Netherlands or a Corona in Mexico City, it's one of our bottle caps most likely. And in the middle of COVID a couple years ago, we decided to invest very heavily in AI. You're like, what does that have to do with making bottle caps? We've used it for 3 things. Number 1, predictive maintenance. Number 2, managing the waste products, managing the industrial wastes. And number 3, being able to remotely direct our production lines. So we can sit in Italy and direct our production lines in Brazil and China. What happened? Our margins went way up. And we were able to do this without firing a single employee. What we told our employees is you have a choice. You can either be the master of these technologies or its slave. We will give you all the training to be its master, but if you won't accept the training, then you got to go, because we want the machines to be the slaves, not the humans. So our margins went way up. What did we do? We bought our competition in the United States, we bought our competition in Canada, and we doubled our production in China. So instead of being colonized by the Americans, instead of being colonized by the Chinese, this family-owned company in Italy is now number 1 globally, and we were the colonizers. We took over the Americans, we took over the Canadians, we doubled in China. And I use this very concrete example for this audience because I do believe in India, it's the application layer that billions and billions and billions of dollars of value can be drawn out. It's not, don't try to be the next ChatGPT or the next DeepSeek. Build the AI models for agriculture, for manufacturing, for transportation, for energy. If you think about all of those areas of expertise that already exist in India, I'm telling you, there are tens of billions of dollars to be made in building the applications that live on these foundation models. And I'll just close by saying, as I think about how many of my friends in the United States are Indian American, how many of their parents came to the United States, you know, either with degrees from the IITs or coming to the United States for graduate school, they came for the American dream. It's the same reason that my great-grandparents emigrated from Europe to the United States. What I think is really interesting, just to inject a little bit of politics into things for 1 minute, is with the rise of India and with the United States taking a little bit different posture to the rest of the world, and certainly with immigration, I think the opportunity in a certain respect is to have an Indian dream. Instead of just thinking about how your labor can go to the Emirates or the United States or the UK, how world-class companies can continue to be built and grown here. And the choice is not to leave and to make more money, but to create enormous value and wealth and well-being here in India. Thank you very much.